Hello. This podcast is a bit different from our normal topics because today we're talking about how to choose the best professional indemnifier. I had a call recently from a young RMO who had received some advertising from a small indemnity insurance company, NZMII, suggesting that their insurance product was superior to MPS cover and making some pretty slanted statements about what MPS is and how it operates. And they asked me, why should I choose MPS? Some of what insurance companies were saying was actually untrue, and some was very biased and unfair. And look, I do passionately believe that the MPS team does an amazing job supporting clinicians in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But I reflected that often our members are unaware of the differences between different indemnifiers and what we offer, even if they have had direct experience with us. So today, I've asked some colleagues along to address some of the issues that have been raised about what MPS offers its members, and maybe look a bit more closely at the advertising claims of others. So I'd like to welcome as a special guest today, Rebecca Imrie, who's the MPS Director of Operations International. So hi, Bex.
Hello.
And we also have Mr. Adam Holloway, who's one of the lawyers from our panel law firm, Wood & Kearney. Hi, Adam.
Hi, Lucy. Thanks for having me along.
So Adam has quite a lot of experience working with insurance companies as well as MPS, so that's quite a useful person for us to have here. And we also have Dr. Sam King, who's one of the medical legal consultants with MPS, who most of our listeners will know by now and probably needs no introduction. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Lucy.
And my name's Lucy Gibbard, and I'm one of the other medical legal consultants at MPS. So, Sam, do you think me feeling upset about the NZMII advertising was reasonable?
So, of course, Lucy, our competitors are going to advertise and present facts in a way that they wish them to be seen. But when they appear to be unfair in their advertising, I have to admit it's very provocative, isn't it? And I do appreciate you providing us with the opportunity to clarify some facts about MPS. Our competitor is an insurance company, so they are a commercial organisation, and their purpose is to make a profit for their shareholders, whereas MPS isn't a commercial organisation. We're in the very privileged position of having no shareholders demanding profits. We're a mutual society set up by doctors for doctors. And although we now assist many clinical psychologists, nurse practitioners, nurses and other allied health providers, our original intent was to be by doctors and for doctors. Our only imperative is to assist our members to the best of our ability. And because we don't have to produce dividends for shareholders, all the fees we gather go back into providing the service for members.
That's true. And look, I think the fact that we can do that and provide help for members with the fees that they give us and not have to pay dividends to shareholders does mean that there is that ability to give a little bit more than an insurance company might. Adam, what do you think about how insurance companies operate with respect to their shareholders in that situation?
Yeah, look, I'm a great supporter of insurance, which is incredibly important tool that we have in all sorts of spheres to manage risk. But in terms of professional indemnity, you don't have to buy an insurance policy with all the boundaries and limits that might have. You can choose to join an indemnity organisation like MPS. And I think you've captured it well in the sense that the ethos of MPS, as I've experienced it, being an independent person but working for you, is as you've described it, that the group of people who work on the ground in MPS wake up in the morning wanting to help their members, and it's a different sort of approach to an organisation that is in the business of selling policies, taking on risk in a way that has to be balanced carefully to make sure that it is remaining solvent and if the shareholders wish, presumably, generating a profit, but that's for them to decide.
And one of the other issues that is often raised is that maybe the MPS is a UK-based company and all the profits go offshore.
Yes, but fundamentally we are not-for-profit organisation, and as a mutual we're essentially owned by all the clinicians who are our members. And all of our New Zealand members are essentially part owners of our society. MPS has been operating in New Zealand here since 1957, and we've got our own local team of admin staff, case managers, and medico-legal consultants like you and I, Lucy. And there are other things to consider, that because we have a very stable international background, MPS has a massive proven record of longevity, whereas insurance companies can come and go.
It's interesting, actually. I had a member ring earlier this year with an issue that had happened over 30 years ago. And we actually provided assistance. And luckily, the issue had been raised with the medical council, and the medical council didn't take it any further because they didn't have access to their records that far back. But I was actually amazed to find that MPS has membership data for New Zealand that far back. So I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that, Lucy. I think one of the things that comes with longevity is MPS itself has been around for 135 years, and we hold data all the way back to that. I mean, it's extraordinary. Some of the if you've ever been to the offices in London, you can actually see the old books and the old ledgers holding some of that information. I wonder if I could just interject here for a second and just build on something that you brought up around the UK issue. If you might just let me have a little bit of a chat about that. It's an old hangover comment. To be very clear, we provide a local service. As Sam said, we have we have 16 people physically on the ground in New Zealand providing the service to the 22,000 members we have here. We make decisions on whether we will assist. We make decisions on discretion. They are all made locally. We lodge our New Zealand branch accounts financials. They are lodged with the New Zealand Companies Office. We are the Southern Hemisphere hub for MPS. We can make decisions in New Zealand for everywhere around the world. In my role, I actually look after 112 employees across the globe, with employees in every single country that we're in, assisting 107,000 members outside of the UK every single day. So I think to say that we're UK-centric and owned is really old news, and it's quite frankly getting a bit tiresome. So I'm hoping one of the reasons I wanted to be on this podcast with you is to try and clear some of that up. And also, don't forget, members can move between our countries without having to rely on a third party either. We've seen lately a few partnerships start to appear between our competitors in the UK and Australia and New Zealand. Basically, these partnerships allow them to move from one product to another, but not within the same company. So I think those sorts of things are something that the model that we have, and to what Adam said as well, we are very unique in the world, and it's a privilege to work for an organisation the size of ours, with close to 300,000 members and nearly 1,000 staff, and that's all been done based on a few doctors sitting around a table 137 years ago wanting to protect themselves.
That's very true, and I have to say I agree that MPS has got some really good benefits from that global family that we're part of. But one of the other things when they're saying that we're a UK-based is that they imply that we're not paying appropriate tax in New Zealand. And there was something in the NZMII advertising that said that MPS New Zealand made 23 million in surplus before tax and paid minimal tax.
I'm sure our members wished we did. No, look, if I'm being generous, I would say that they have just misread our branch accounts. It's one of those things that can be a bit of an issue when you don't understand an organisation and how that organisation works, and then you read their financials. You can get confused by what you're seeing. The 23 million that they were looking at as claims reserves, and as insurers, I would have expected them to understand that. But that's the money that's put aside every year to deal with that particular year's claims. And so I would have thought that members would be happy that we have $23 million sitting in those claims. It means we're not going to be coming asking them for any more money if something big pops up. And actually, the fact that we hold 23 million in claims reserves in the New Zealand branch kind of counters their claims that all the money goes offshore. So I think just to clear that up, we pay, I can assure you, we pay all the tax that we are required to pay in New Zealand.
So does that mean, Bex, that you're not siphoning it off into a Cayman Islands account for yourself?
No.
Is that what you're saying?
No, unfortunately, no.
No
I think
big
I think the ethics committee might have something to say about that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. And I mean, I do think it's funny that they think we made that much of a profit when we're a non-profit organisation, but there you go. Okay, so the other thing I think we should think about is that not all indemnifiers in the market, we don't all offer the same service. At MPS, we're not just a basic insurance contract. We offer much more than that, including providing advice before there's a complaint, lots of education and other supports for our members. So Sam, what does MPS do for our members?
Oh, Lucy, it's actually quite a long list when you think about it. So I'll start with the more obvious things. We help with complaints to practices, HDC cases, privacy matters, coroner's reports, police reports, media intrusion and medical counsel matters. We also provide a lot of extra benefits with many bespoke presentations around the country, which we do free of charge. We obviously produce these podcasts, we do webinars, particularly in response to urgent issues. We provide our members with casebook, which contains articles and other information which is really useful for their practice. We have fact sheets on our website. We have an e-learning platform which is specifically for members, and we provide a counselling service. We also do an awful lot of stakeholder work, which I think our members are probably unaware of because it is behind the scenes. We work to advocate for our members, which includes working alongside organisations such as the Council of Medical Colleges, for example, or the GP College. We've met with Medical Council, we meet with the HDC, we make submissions to provide a strong voice for the concerns of our membership. We also work closely with unions, say the ASMS, which is the union for SMOs, and we work alongside ASMS essentially to provide a seamless service for our members. We've also provided input into medical legal issues with health pathways. We've met with the Ministry of Health regarding PAs, physician associates. And I was wondering, would an insurance company provide all of this? I'm thinking that if your prime driver is for profit, then you probably aren't spending a lot of money or wanting to divert funds into doing these sorts of things. But we do this for our membership because as clinicians ourselves, we want the best for our colleagues, don't we?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. But do you think there's a difference between the way an indemnifier like MPS and a mutual society handles complaints compared to an insurer? Adam, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so by complaints you mean if a member or an insured has a problem they're wanting help with.
Yeah.
Almost certainly, yes. So, MPS, as members hopefully know, if you have an issue, you will call and speak to the medico-legal consultant on call. So either Sam or Lucy or one of your team members, someone who's a doctor with some legal training as well. And then often the sorts of problems that are brought forward actually just need that sort of medical, collegial or clinical perspective. And then if it is a legal issue and we can add value, then you will engage us as lawyers. And we'll continue to work alongside the medical legal consultant while being the lawyer for the member and representing their interests. Look, a typical insurance company and the insurance market's very diverse, so I can't cover off all of the options, but if you have what we call a PI policy or a professional indemnity policy and something happens, you might call your broker. Typically, that might be where your relationship is, or for some cases, you might call through to the insurer and you'll speak to a claims manager or a claims handler who will identify whether or not this is something that is covered by your policy or is at least how it needs to be further explored to see whether or not it does fall within your policy. An insurance company will sometimes engage what we call coverage counsel, separate lawyers who can provide the insurance company with an opinion about whether or not the matter is covered by the policy. that doesn't happen all the time, but it can happen. And if they think the person needs a lawyer and it's covered, then they'll instruct a lawyer to help. And look, they'll try and choose a lawyer who operates in the right area. You'd expect them to. They're reasonably pretty good at that. But it's as I think I said before, it's a different sort of ethos. And it's not because people don't want to be helpful, and sometimes insurance companies will help when they strictly don't have to, but they're always needing to be mindful of the fact that they have taken on certain risks in exchange for money, and they need to know that those risks are covered, and that at the end of the day, their actuary is going to be able to report to the Reserve Bank that everything's fine. So it's a different, and not necessarily a wrong, but a different way of managing risk than joining a mutual indemnity provider like MPS.
Mm. And I think the other thing I think about with that, and it's probably partly because it's my job, that I actually think with MPS, you've actually got clinicians involved in helping answer if it's a complaint or a HDC or a medical counsel. And actually sometimes a lawyer looking at a complaint or an issue may not actually necessarily identify that clinical risk. And so in that situation, actually having medical legal advisors on the ground is actually a big point of difference for MPS.
I agree. I think that, because the fact that, for example, Lucy and I are GPs, we understand the PMS or the practice management system that we use, or the practicalities of working as a GP. So the advice that we provide is really practical. You can put it, you can think about, yes, I relate to that, and I hear what you're saying, and this is what you can do. So it's not strictly medico-legal advice, but often it's very practical and makes a massive difference, I think, to our members.
The model is fantastic that you've developed, and in essence, members are getting two for the price of one, in the sense that they will have an experienced colleague, clinician, and a good lawyer helping them together. And it is the sum of those parts is more than
we get what you're saying.
Yeah.
More than either alone.
More than either alone. Late in the afternoon.
Synergistic. It is.
It is what makes MPS unique. I think you said that just then, Lucy. It is what makes us unique around the world. That those MLC and DLCs that we have assisting as well. It is one of our differentiators that we pull that out a lot. And I just wanted to add, because I'm all about statistics, only 15% of the cases in New Zealand actually go to lawyers. The rest are dealt with in-house by a team of, what have we got, about 7 MLCs and a couple of case managers.
Mm. Yeah, which is great, because it's not like we're not going to lawyers because we're worried
Correct.
about that. We're actually, because we are very quick to go to the lawyers if we think there's a legal problem in there. But actually a lot of what is in complaints and is in issues that go to the HDC or the medical council, there's a lot of clinical issues in there. It's not, there's only a little bit of it that's actually about law. So yeah, interesting that it's only 50%.
I think too that, no disrespect to you, Adam, at all, but when you introduce a lawyer into a case,
like that.
I know, but the moment you introduce a lawyer into the case, you really are ratcheting things up. And because the very nature of lawyers is adversarial, sometimes there are many cases where we think actually it's much better to not have a lawyer involved. And I think that we will have more success in resolving certain matters without a lawyer. Would you agree with that, Lucy?
Yeah, and I think honestly, the fact that we're on the advice calls, the first people talk to, there's so much stuff that we can actually sort out there and then. And how often is it that we hear the member say, "Oh God, it's great to talk to someone who understands you. It's great that you understand the system and what's likely to happen and how this is going to go. I feel so much better just having talked to you."
Yeah, it's interesting reflecting on that 15% is an interesting statistic, Bex. I think it probably reflects two two things, because I've never got the sense that there's a reluctance to get lawyers involved when you need them. I'm not getting cases late and thinking, oh goodness, I wish I'd had this earlier. I think it's probably a function of you are opening things you call cases, that you're providing members with help where they're just not things that would be regarded as claims under a policy. And so that changes the statistic, because there's a lot of work that you're just doing that wouldn't qualify as a claim under a normal PI policy. And the second thing it will reflect is that even for some things which would be claims, you are presumably successfully managing to resolve it at a lower level. And the more quickly something can be resolved and at the lowest level possible is always going to be a benefit to the member. If things can't be solved, then you can spend some of your $23 million, Bex, and making sure that we can swing into action, which as I say, I've never got the sense that there's any hesitancy in doing that for the right cases.
No, you're absolutely right. And the money that we do spend on legal cases absolutely shows that we're spending the money in the right place. And I think just to build on that a little bit more, is there's about 7,000 contacts with members on an annual basis around an issue. So that's either by phone or by an email. Only 2,000 of those actually turn into a case. So there's about 5,000 contacts where we are actually assisting them, and with not even getting to the threshold of a case, without that then becoming even a bigger case, a case would, as you say, that would under an insurance policy become a claim. So I think that time and that the resource that we put into that first line is bringing down the costs for the members, which is why, another plug, we've had 5 years of no increases at a time when it's everything else has been going up. And that's because, Lucy, Sam and the team and the lawyers, to be fair, are managing those costs.
And I do think that if you ring up an insurance company, you're likely to be talking to a claims manager or an administrative person, and they may pass you on to talk to a lawyer. But it's not likely necessarily going to be a clinical person who's got clinical experience on the ground, who would necessarily appreciate the clinical situation or what would be expected in clinical practice or what the vulnerabilities in that clinical situation might be. So I think, the clinicians is a big part of what MPS is. Moving on, maybe we should actually also talk a little bit about this difference between indemnity and insurance, because I know that we often use them interchangeably, and an indemnity products can be insurance, but I think we often get in a bit of a muddle about that. And they're not exactly the same thing. They both guard against loss, but they are a slightly different system. And so maybe Adam could explain to us indemnity, insurance, those words, what do they mean?
The difference with an insurance company that's selling a policy is that sense of surety that, if you buy a particular sort of cover, then you have a right to it rather than a discretionary indemnity, and we might come to talk about that. And that's what a policy is. It's the insurance company saying, in these specific circumstances, we promise to do X, Y, Z. But you need to then understand what risks are they covering, what, importantly, are they not covering, and are there any limits on the sorts of help they will provide? Because while you might have certainty that you'll get something, you also have certainty that there's absolutely no obligation to give you anything beyond that. Yes, MPS is discretionary, and in terms of my own personal experience, I've never had a case I've been involved with where MPS has said to me, look, actually, we've decided not to assist, in circumstances where in a typical PI policy that would have been covered. I've not come up against you being more restrictive than a normal PI policy. I've certainly had lots of experience of MPS's discretionary decisions, its extension of indemnity cover being a lot more flexible and generous than what I typically see in a standard PI policy. I've almost every week, frankly, I will be doing work for your members where I think, this is great, I'm loving this, I'm really being helpful. There is no way this would be covered in a sort of standard PI environment, because it's just not a claim. It's not a risk of a disciplinary consequence or someone seeking money off a doctor that a policy normally responds to. It's just something that's happened in that professional's life that they need help with that has a legal aspect to it. It's a great privilege to be able to do that and to not be having to keep one eye on a policy and report back if I think the facts have changed in a way that brings cover into question.
It's a common theme with our panel law firms around the world. I was in Hong Kong a couple of months ago, and I had exactly the same conversation with one of our panel lawyers there, who said that so much of their work is stuff that that their other insurers' clients would not cover. So it is a discretion. But from our perspective, I mean, the medico-legal and dental-legal world is very complex, and you only have to look at what happened with COVID to see how complex it can become very quickly. So I think discretion for me is very much about having the flexibility to provide assistance to a member with one eye on, if I had to stand up in front of 100 members and justify this decision, could I do it? That's what we have to do when we're looking at exercising discretion. But so it gives us the flexibility that insurance contracts don't always give most of our competitors around the world, who generally are insurers around the world. So it's a big thing for us. So perhaps we could look at some of the exclusions and limitations of the other insurers in our market.
Yeah, we have had a look around, and there are some exclusions in some other products. One particular that I noticed was where they don't cover claims arising from material published or broadcast by whatever medium by the insured, either by the insured or on their behalf, or to which they've contributed, which I thought was a really interesting exclusion, because I think MPS assists all the time with members if someone's written something in an article or published a post on social media or given an interview, or and somebody else has complained to the medical council, or so that I think that's a really common thing that we would definitely cover.
Yeah, if I can chip in there, that is the sort of exclusion you might commonly see in a PI policy, because they need to know what risks they're covering, and if that were in a policy that a doctor had, then you're absolutely right, Lucy. It is relatively frequent work for us to be involved in the consequences of something that a doctor's published. People sometimes put unwise things on social media. They sometimes advertise their services online in a way that a colleague disagrees with. It's not uncommon material for us to get involved in.
The exclusion that caught my eye was around not covering members if they fail to comply with provisions of the medical council. Say, for example, a statement on sexual boundaries or one of the other statements.
Yeah, if there were an exclusion like that in a policy and it was expressed in that way, with a link to a guideline, rather than just being clear that, for example, other sorts of exclusions might be gross negligence or criminal conduct or something like that. Linking to a policy is an interesting way of framing an exclusion, and it would get the lawyers pretty excited about where the boundaries of cover sit, particularly given that medical council guidelines or professional standard statements are not always 100% clear about what they are demanding of practitioners. So that standard in particular, the sexual boundaries one, states right up the front something like, a doctor must only conduct a physical examination of a patient where it's clinically indicated and with the patient's informed consent. Now, as you can imagine, doctors get complaints about that. Things get misconstrued, or patients, get aggrieved about how an examination has been conducted. If that were to be excluded, then that would be, potentially quite a large area of risk that the practitioner might find themselves unsupported for. Another sort of exclusion that you might see in a PI policy is exclusion where the claim has been contributed to by criminal conduct on behalf of the insured. And if you were to have a policy like that, it would be interesting to see how the insurance company might respond, for example, to an insured who has been caught drink driving and had an excess breath alcohol conviction, and then needs support engaging with the inevitable professional conduct committee and medical counsel involvement that would follow after a conviction. I think everyone thinks, it's not going to be me who makes that sort of mistake, but things do happen, and it's from time to time we certainly do find ourselves helping members who have run into trouble with the criminal law in their private lives, but that means they also need to be assisted with the medical counsel.
And one of the other things I think in the insurance contracts is there's often a limit on an amount that they'll pay towards a certain thing. MPS, we don't have any limits for anything as far as, we cover what is covered to whatever cost it will be. But I think that some of the insurance products do have limits to what they'll reimburse, and the question is, how does as a clinician, how do you know whether that limit is a reasonable limit for what that thing would cost?
Yeah, I think that's probably hard. I mean, if you're buying a policy, that's something you'd want to look out for, Lucy. You'd want to see whether or not there are limits on, for example, if you go through a disciplinary process and there are costs awarded against you, is there going to be a cap on how much your insurer will pay? And it's hard as a doctor who's never had to go through that process to know whether or not the limit that might be imposed in a policy is going to be enough cover for you. The reality is that if MPS is going to really go into bat for someone, which they do, and we have a big defended hearing, but then part of the charge still gets established, and we successfully defend other parts. Nevertheless, the cost that might be awarded against you can, just because of the way the health practitioner's disciplinary tribunal works, get into six figures. So, we're talking about really significant sums of money that the tribunal will order you to pay. And if you don't have cover to, so that wherever you're getting your indemnity support from is going to pay that on your behalf, then that could be life-changing.
So, we've talked an awful lot. Bex, have we got any take-home messages that we would like our listeners to understand as we finish?
Yeah, look, from my perspective, just remember longevity, financial security, discretion means flexibility. We also have nose cover now, which means there's no issues when moving from a claims-made product that had been an issue for a while. That's new. And I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are owned by our members, and our only priority is to protect them.
Thanks, Bex. Yeah, Sam, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I have to say that when I first started with MPS, I'd had nothing to do with the indemnifier. Anything that I'll admit anyway on air. But when I became an advisor with MPS, I was really impressed by the product. And I have to say that I'm incredibly proud to be able to help our colleagues in the way that we do. And I think there's nothing better for our colleagues that they have a clinician and a lawyer standing by their side.
Adam, anything you'd like to finish up with?
Yeah, look, well, I mean, I work for insurance companies. I work for MPS. I'm not at all opposed to insurance. I think it's, like I said at the beginning, essential to modern life. But it would be sad, I think, if people were making their choices between MPS and something else on a misconception that if you go with MPS, you're at greater risk, or if you go with MPS, there might be things that they won't help you with that an insurer might. Because in my experience, that's just not correct. Yes, it's a different sort of model, and I've seen attempts to make that word discretionary seem scary. But if you actually look over the many, many years that MPS has been operating, there's just no reason for that to be what drives your choice. If you're someone who desperately wants an insurance policy, there'll be policies out there you can buy, but what goes with that are all the other differences that you'll encounter as opposed to MPS. You may not have access to medico-legal consultants. You may ultimately run up against the exclusions and limitations of that policy. And that's life. Those choices are out there for you. But it would be sad, I think, for people to be sort of deliberately confused about what's on offer for MPS. And as someone who sits a little bit outside and looks in and observes how you guys operate, I'm proud to be associated with MPS in terms of doing your work for you and having the opportunity to help all your members.
Thanks, Adam. So look, from me, I would agree with Sam and Adam that I'm incredibly proud to work for MPS. There has to be a reason why we're the most commonly chosen indemnifier in New Zealand. And I often say to people, if they're trying to think about it, talk to your senior colleagues, because most of them who've had a contact with MPS will be able to tell you why it's a product that you should be engaging with. So I hope it's been helpful to give you some information about understanding what MPS does and what the difference between us and an insurance product is. If you do have questions or want to talk to us about anything you've heard on this podcast, please do feel free to call us on 0800 2255 677, option 1, and you can talk to our membership department, or you could find their email on our website. So next time we will be getting back to our usual medical legal topics. If you like Medical Protection Podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a review. If you'd like a podcast on a specific topic, please email nzpodcasts@medicalprotection.org. So thanks for listening.